few weeks ago, we explored the story of the Tower of Babel, and I reflected on God's gift of diversity and the importance of having more than one language, more than one story, more than one point of view as we understand God and the world around us. This fall, we're sharing lots of stories to widen our understanding and connect our hearts. We've already shared this month some Sunday fellowship stories. Last week we heard from conference leader Reverend Brewer Wallen. In a few weeks we'll share stories of folks who we love as part of our All Saints celebration. And today is the first of 3 Sundays in October and November in which folks from our congregation will share personal stories that connect with our scriptures. In the text we heard today, we remember that God led the Israelites up out of slavery in Egypt and then into a long journey in the wilderness. These folks have been released from terrible bondage, but they're hardly comfortable in their new life. Most of all, in this passage, we learn that they're hungry and they're angry about it. Angry almost enough to wish that they were still back in Egypt, enslaved but with a good meal in front of them. We have 3 very different stories to connect with this scripture, and I am so grateful for these folks who have agreed to share them with us today. Let's pay attention to how this scripture story and their stories can touch our hearts and teach us.
When Hannah invited me to share a reflection on the scripture passage today, it would have been much easier to say no, especially since my relationship with God became ambiguous enough that I haven't attended here regularly for several years. But the passage resonated so strongly with the volunteer work I've been doing at Open Table in Maynard for the last 16 years that I said yes. When the pandemic hit, Open Table switched its food pantry operation to an outdoor drive-through model, and I'm the person on the late Tuesday shift who checks in each car and then reads to each driver the list of foods available that week so they can choose which they want. Some items are easy: eggs, milk, bag of assorted fresh produce. But then there are things like refrigerated surprise. And do you hear the driver echoing the Israelites' question, "What is it?" Well, it's some random item from a grocery store that's near its sell-by date. It might be a prepared sandwich, or a small salad, or a tub of pesto or ham salad. Who knows? And then there are items like rutabaga, which even people who know it's a root vegetable may still wonder how they'd need to prepare it. I have to imagine it's the same concern the Israelite women had facing this flaky dust all over the ground. To make matters even more fun, a fair number of people coming to Open Table speak very little English. Sometimes I use my high school Spanish, and often I use the basic Portuguese I've been learning online to be more welcoming to these people who are making their way through a strange and unfamiliar land. And is this reminding anyone of those Israelites in the wilderness again? The surprise and relief in people's eyes when this middle-class white American woman offers to speak to them in Portuguese has been great incentive to keep studying. Some people coming to Open Table have such desperate need for food help that they will take anything they can get. But some people have medical or religious dietary restrictions or very limited kitchen facilities, and they don't want to take food they can't use when they know other people need it too. Like the Israelites' happy ending, they want there to be enough food for everyone. And parents want to make sure they get foods that their kids are willing to eat. This is why next week, for Service Sunday, one of the opportunity will be packing kids' bags full of familiar, child-friendly foods that Open Table will then distribute. Is this God's love working through us? Or is this us working to love our neighbor? And what does it mean that sometimes it feels like holy work, even for those of us who don't know where God might fit into any of it? I don't have answers, but I have reached peace with not having answers.
The Exodus story reminds me of two stories in my experience. First, leaving pastoral ministry. Second, going to and returning from a workshop I led in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Two themes stand out: blame and nourishment. The Israelites blamed Moses and Aaron for freeing them only to starve. I didn't blame parishioners for threatening my life when they asked me to resign after 14 years. But did they see all that I had contributed? Yet, one parishioner's comment resonated. God had to kick you out so you can find what else he has for you to do. For 18 months, another church provided spiritual nourishment as I shared my hurt and uncertainty, sought healing, and uncovered my own issues. I hadn't supported some parishioners at critical moments. More importantly, who was I? Beyond leadership roles in church and community. Like the Israelites, my challenge was learning to live outside my comfort zone. How far? Through a grueling PhD study, then a new job search, 9 years before starting anew. Just getting places during my first year felt like leaving Egypt, with Pharaoh's army in pursuit. UN flights canceled, driving at night without headlights over enemy-controlled mountains, then walking stooped through a tunnel into Sarajevo. Workshop participants from all factions expressed anger, hurt, and grief while recounting killings, dashed hopes, distrust, and blame. Later, they acknowledged mutual suffering and responsibility and asked God to save everyone. These traumatized people moved beyond blame far faster than I had. Yet, when encouraged to work for change, there was silence. Had we provided nourishment or only overwhelming discouragement? At the end, I didn't blame anyone, but asked questions. Did I simply heighten hopelessness and risk many lives? Now we had to leave before it became impossible. Risking Sniper's Alley to phone home, saying we were starting our escape. Hundreds of rockets falling around us. Police refusing to drive us out. Teenagers helping us climb an Olympic mountain, avoiding minefields and gunfire. After 4 days, not 40 years, I could phone Barbara, saying we were safely out of Sarajevo. Following the war, I returned and met a prominent Muslim participant who had used our methodology for enabling change. He convinced Bosnia's political leaders to accept the ceasefire that led to peace accords ending the war. I realized I could never again say anything was impossible. The pathway may be unclear and dispiriting, but like the Israelites, I learned to face challenges with hope. For another 29 years, I've watched people overcome blame and find empowering spiritual sustenance. Often relationships were transformed, sometimes whole communities, occasionally entire societies. But invariably, with God's help, people changed themselves. People in other countries, but also here. Other faith communities, also here. When today's news is filled with anger, blame, deflection of responsibility, and justification for revenge, can we find unexplained nourishment? Maybe only as much as heavenly bread as needed. Can we trust God for at least faithful pathways, faint but there, of hope?
To be honest, when I look at this Exodus passage, I see some real hospitality red flags. I mean, God has invited the Israelites, God's dear ones, to do this new thing in this new place. But well into the journey, God has not exactly rolled out the welcome mat. Their presence doesn't even look like it was expected, let alone planned for. No wonder they were salty about it. I contrast this with the end of summer celebration that Ellie Garvey produced in our labyrinth on September 4th. Some of you were there. As the closing hymn was ending, Ellie and her helpers were rolling out warm, savory quiches, sweet, juicy watermelon, sparkling punch, and comforting coffee cake. Little tables materialized on the labyrinth with tablecloths. It was like the best kind of breakfast cafe. The transformation in the spirit of us worshipers, half of whom didn't know this treat was coming, was dramatic. Suddenly it was a party. And you know, the love of God was thick among us. It felt like heaven was here in our labyrinth. Personally, serving food and creating a welcoming setting is a love language that I resonate with. As any of you who have been in a meeting with me know, I'm basically shy, and I get really tongue-tied in public situations. I love people so much, but most of the time I'm better at saying it with candles and banana bread than words. Hospitality is kind of a relationship strategy for me. Maybe that's what bothers me about these poor Israelite situation. I'm not alone. A ministry mentor of mine told me years ago that any chance you might have of inviting people into your ministry has to start with hospitality. He said, people need to know that they are welcome, expected, and planned for. That's just become my mantra, whether I'm setting up for company at home or serving with the worship and welcome ministry here at church. With worship and welcome, and really in everything we do, I think we strive to meet people where they are and invite them into this new thing. We do it in 100 ways, big and small, love is in all the details. I hope we go over the top with our welcome sometimes because the love of God is like that. But I also wonder, who are the stranded Israelites today? There are folks out there that don't yet feel invited, who are not sure the table will ever be set for them. I wonder how we will welcome them. Back to the Exodus story. As you recall, it gets better as it goes on. God must have had God's reasons for not making it initially easy for the Israelites, but in her good time, God sends bread from heaven, saying, "You shall have your fill of bread, then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." To me, like at Ellie's party and in all the hospitality we give here and at home, God is saying, look, I am here. I'm here in the offering, and I'm here in the receiving of this love. And in fact, I'm the hostess. It's my party. Heaven is my party, and you are my most welcome guests. That makes me feel better.